Okay, have you ever sent a text and been like, wait, did I actually say what I meant to say?
Oh, all the time.
Today, we're going to do a deep dive into texting mishaps. Um, those moments where you're just like, ugh, why did I send that?
Right.
And what they reveal about communicating in this crazy digital world that we live in.
Right.
We have a great anecdote from one of the sources.
Okay.
It's basically about a simple conversation
Yeah.
that just totally goes off the rails
Yeah.
because of missed details
Interesting.
and just all these funny back and forth, oops, my bad moments. It's great.
I love a good oops, my bad.
Yeah, so the person's texting with a friend. Everything seems totally normal. And then they have this realization like, wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
I have been so off topic this entire time.
Oh, no?
You can practically feel the panic in the source material. It's great.
I can imagine.
Like cue the record scratch sound effect. So funny. But why does this happen so often with texting?
Well, I think a key factor is the lack of nonverbal cues that we usually rely on, when we're talking to people face to face. Like, you don't have facial expressions,
Right.
you don't have tone of voice.
Right.
It's just words on a screen. It's like you're trying to decipher like a secret code sometimes.
Yeah, and the source material even mentions, like, man, I wish I had mind-reading powers.
Oh, really?
Like, just to avoid these awkward texting situations. It's so funny. But it makes you think, are we expecting, like, more clarity from texting than we do from an actual face-to-face conversation?
Right. It's interesting. I think you might be onto something there. We may be unconsciously bringing like higher expectations for clarity to texting.
Right.
And of course, we all have our own unique communication styles and past experiences that we bring to like every interaction.
Yeah.
And those color how we interpret messages as well.
So it's not just about the words themselves.
Right.
It's like all the baggage we bring to the conversation. Like everyone's operating with their own like secret decoder ring.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Oh, speaking of secret decoder rings, the SARC material brings up something called tone policing in texting.
Okay.
And specifically the fear of exclamation points being interpreted as like declarations of war.
Oh, yeah.
Can we talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. I think it's a perfect example of how a lack of those nonverbal cues can just like totally lead to misinterpretations. So for those who might not know, tone policing basically refers to criticizing someone for how they're expressing their emotions. So, their emotions might be deemed inappropriate or unacceptable in some way.
Gotcha.
And in texting, this often plays out with things like punctuation and word choice. Like, think about an exclamation point.
Right.
Someone might use an exclamation point just to convey like enthusiasm or excitement.
Totally.
But it can be read as aggression or anger.
Oh, for sure. It's like the digital equivalent of walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
Like one misplaced exclamation point, and you've gone from friendly banter to like DEFCON 1.
Exactly.
So how do we navigate that?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. It's like a delicate dance between, expressing yourself authentically while also like being mindful of how your messages might be perceived by the other person.
Yeah.
And of course, there's, that added pressure to respond quickly,
Right.
which can lead to like sacrificing clarity just for the sake of speed.
Right, and that pressure adds a whole other layer to those texting mishaps, doesn't it? It's like you're trying to juggle flaming torches while riding a unicycle at the same time,
I love that analogy.
metaphorically speaking.
Yeah.
So in this anecdote, after they realize they're off topic, the person sends a bunch of, oops, my bad, texts, just trying to get the conversation back on track. Which is comical. But it makes you think about, like, the emotional impact of these texting mishaps, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely a source of humor, but you're right. There's a deeper, like, emotional layer at play. These mishaps, even though they're funny when you look back at them,
Right.
they can trigger feelings of, like, frustration and anxiety, even, like, self-doubt.
Yeah.
We start to question our communication skills, our ability to connect with people.
It's like a mini crisis of confidence, all because of a few misplaced words.
Exactly. And this brings us to a really intriguing aspect of communication theory. It's called the communication accommodation theory.
Okay.
And this theory suggests that people will actually adapt their communication style to match the person that they're interacting with.
Oh, okay.
So in texting, we might unconsciously be mirroring the other person's style, which can totally backfire if our interpretations are like a little bit off.
So if someone's like a super brief texter, I might become overly concise and leave out important details.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or if someone uses like a lot of slang or emojis,
Right.
we might try to do the same thing, even if it feels unnatural to us. So this attempt to accommodate can sometimes lead to those like hilarious and sometimes really frustrating texting mishaps.
It's almost like we're trying to speak different dialects within the language of texting.
Yeah, yeah.
So fascinating. But let's go back to this anecdote for a second. So after the oops, my bad moment, the friend responds with like the perfect line. They say, Chris, you're weird. It's fine.
Oh, that's great.
It's such a human moment. Like they diffuse the tension with humor.
I love that.
But what really struck me was what comes next in the anecdote. The friend follows up with, but seriously, how are you really doing?
Oh, wow.
Like there's a real shift in tone there. It's like, okay, we had our laugh, but now let's get real.
That's beautiful.
And this is where the anecdote gets really, really interesting, don't you think?
I do, yeah. I think it really highlights the importance of moving beyond that like superficial level of conversation.
Right.
Even amidst like miscommunication and awkwardness. It's a reminder that texting, even with all of its limitations, can be a gateway to those deeper conversations.
Right.
And a way to like check in with each other on a more meaningful level.
It's like a digital bridge to human connection. And this is something we'll explore further in part 2 of this deep dive, right?
Exactly. We'll delve deeper into all the like psychological and social dynamics that are at play here.
Awesome.
And how we can use texting to foster those more mindful and meaningful connections, especially in a world that often feels like chaotic and overwhelming.
Yeah, totally. Stay tuned, folks.
Yeah.
This is just the tip of the iceberg.
Absolutely. This whole conversation about texting mishaps and like deeper connection, makes me think about the broader impact of digital communication on our ability to empathize.
Oh, empathy in the digital age.
Yeah.
That's super interesting.
Yeah, there's been some really fascinating research on this.
Oh, cool.
And some studies suggest that while digital communication can help us stay connected, on one hand, it can also lead to like a decrease in empathy if we're not careful.
Yeah, it's easy to forget there's an actual human on the other side of the screen when you're just like firing off these quick texts.
Right.
Or scrolling through social media, not really thinking about who's on the other side.
Exactly. And without those nonverbal cues, facial expressions, body language, that kind of stuff, it becomes harder to like accurately understand someone's emotions and perspective.
Oh, totally.
We might miss subtle signs of like sadness or frustration or even like joy.
It's like we're missing those crucial pieces of the puzzle to help us really understand what someone's feeling or what they're trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
It reminds me of that game, where you whisper a phrase around a circle and by the end it's totally different.
Right. Telephone.
Yeah, exactly. Except it's our understanding of each other. That's getting lost in translation.
And this disconnect can lead to, misunderstandings and misinterpretations and even conflict.
Oh, for sure.
It's almost like we're all speaking different languages even when we're using the same words.
Which brings us back to the source material.
Yeah.
And the friend's perfectly timed, how are you really doing?
Yes.
That question just seems so powerful, especially given this whole potential empathy gap.
I think so too.
In digital communication.
I think it's a reminder to like go beyond that surface level, to really check in with each other on a deeper level, to ask open-ended questions that invite like genuine sharing and create that space for vulnerability.
And maybe to be more intentional about how we're using text,
Yeah.
knowing that it's not always the ideal medium.
Right.
For complex or sensitive conversations.
Absolutely. I think that's a key takeaway here. It's not about abandoning texting altogether.
Right.
It's still useful. But it's about using it more mindfully, recognizing its limitations, and, maybe supplementing it with other forms of communication.
Yeah, like video calls, or even better, like face-to-face.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
exactly. There's really no substitute for those in-person connections where we can, like, pick up on all those nonverbal cues and connect on that deeper, more empathetic level.
But even within the realm of texting, are there things that we can do?
Oh, for sure.
To kind of bridge that empathy gap?
Yeah, being mindful of our tone, asking clarifying questions,
Okay.
resisting the urge to jump to conclusions.
So slowing down.
Yeah.
Choosing our words carefully, maybe like using emojis more strategically.
Yes, exactly. And maybe Most importantly, remembering that the person on the other end of that text is just that, a person with their own thoughts and feelings and experiences.
It's like that saying, be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. We never really know what someone else is going through, so just approaching our digital interactions with a little more empathy and compassion
Totally.
can go a long way.
It really can, and this brings us to another important point, I think, that often gets overlooked.
Okay.
In these conversations about digital communication, the impact of external stressors.
The source material mentioned global chaos
Yes.
and economic roller coasters.
Right.
So how do those external factors play into all of this?
Well, when we're, stressed, anxious, or overwhelmed, it can really affect our communication patterns, making us more prone to misinterpretations and less able to empathize with others.
It's like we're all walking around with shorter fuses, both digitally and in real life.
Yeah, it's a good point. So those seemingly insignificant texting mishaps might actually be a symptom of a much larger issue,
Right.
Which is this collective stress and anxiety of our times.
Which suggests that maybe we need to cut ourselves some slack and extend a little more grace to each other when it comes to digital communication.
I think so, because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to navigate this, crazy complex world and stay connected the best we can.
Which I think brings us back to that central question. In a world that's totally saturated with digital communication, how do we cultivate more mindful and meaningful connections? What are some things we can do besides just being more empathetic?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that we'll continue to explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll look at specific strategies for navigating the nuances of texting, for fostering those deeper connections in a digital world, and for embracing, that messy, imperfect beauty of human communication.
I can't wait. This has been a fascinating journey so far.
Me too.
And I'm really eager to see where we land in part 3. We've talked about the empathy gap and all those external stressors that are impacting us.
Yeah.
It's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed by all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Where do we even begin? How do we cultivate these more mindful and meaningful connections in the digital age?
Right. It's definitely a challenge, but I think the anecdote from your source material offers some really valuable clues.
Sure.
Remember how the friend responded to that texting mishap?
Yeah.
With humor and understanding,
Uh-huh.
and then pivoted to that deeper conversation.
Yeah.
I think that's a great model for all of us to follow.
It was such a refreshing change from the typical online reactions.
Right, totally.
Which are so quick to judge and criticize.
Right, exactly.
It just felt very human.
Yeah.
Very real.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that we all make mistakes,
Uh-huh.
especially in texting, where things can so easily get lost in translation.
Right.
So approaching these situations with a sense of humor and compassion can go a long way.
It's like choosing connection over correction.
Yes.
Which I think ties into something we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Self-compassion.
Oh, absolutely.
We need to be kind to ourselves.
Yes.
Realizing that we're all just navigating this complex world of digital communication, as best we can.
Yeah.
It's okay to make mistakes.
Totally.
It's okay to feel frustrated, confused.
Yeah.
The key is to approach these challenges with curiosity.
Yes.
And a willingness to learn and grow.
I love that.
So rather than beating ourselves up
Right.
over every texting faux pas, we can view these as opportunities to practice more mindful communication.
Exactly.
Both with ourselves and with others.
And speaking of mindful communication, I think one of the most powerful tools that we have is that simple question, how are you really doing?
Oh, yeah. The question that turned this whole anecdote into a much deeper conversation.
Yeah.
It seems so simple, but it can be so profound.
It really can. It goes beyond that surface level,
Right.
beyond the pleasantries.
Right.
And invites, that genuine sharing and connection. And it's something we can practice not only in texting, but in all of our interactions.
It's like the secret code for unlocking deeper connections.
I love that. Yeah.
And it's something we can all use regardless of our texting expertise.
Exactly. And it's not just about asking the question, but it's also about being present.
Yeah.
And listening with an open heart to the response. Really hearing what the other person is saying, both verbally and non-verbally.
So even in texting, where we don't have those nonverbal cues, we can still practice active listening.
For sure.
By paying attention to the nuances of their language, asking clarifying questions.
Yes.
And offering genuine support and encouragement.
It's about creating that space where the other person feels safe.
Right.
to be vulnerable and share their authentic selves.
And that leads to another important aspect of like mindful digital communication.
Yes.
Boundaries.
Boundaries, yes.
In texting. Tell me more about that.
It's easy to get caught up in that constant stream of messages and notifications.
Oh, for sure.
But it's important to recognize that we have the right to set limits on our digital engagement.
So like turning off notifications.
Yes.
Or setting specific times to check messages.
Exactly.
Or letting people know that you might not respond right away.
Yes, yes. It's about taking control of our digital lives.
Yeah.
Making sure that technology is serving us, not the other way around.
Right, right.
And it's about respecting other people's boundaries as well.
It's like creating a digital sanctuary.
Yes.
Where we can connect with intention and purpose.
I love that.
Rather than feeling like obligated to respond to every ping and buzz.
Exactly. And I think that sense of intentionality is really at the heart of mindful communication, both on and offline. It's about choosing to be present in our interactions, to listen deeply and to communicate with clarity and compassion.
So as we wrap up this deep dive on texting mishaps and mindful communication, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I would say embrace imperfection.
Okay.
Texting mishaps, they happen. They're a normal part of being human.
Right.
Don't beat yourself up about it, View them as opportunities to learn and grow.
Okay.
Cultivate empathy. Remember that there's a real person on the other side of every text. Try to see things from their perspective. Offer compassion and understanding.
Ask the magic question.
Yes. How are you really doing? It's a powerful tool for building deeper connections.
Okay.
Use it often. And genuinely listen to the response.
Set boundaries.
Yes, yes. Don't be afraid to set limits on your digital engagement.
Right.
It's okay to disconnect and prioritize your well-being.
And choose connection over correction.
Yes. Approach texting mishaps with that sense of humor. And understanding, focusing on preserving the connection rather than assigning blame.
It's not just about the words we use. It's also about the intention that we bring to our interactions.
Absolutely.
Even a simple text can be a bridge to deeper understanding.
Yeah.
If we approach it with mindfulness and a genuine desire to connect.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I'd love to leave your listeners with a challenge.
Okay.
Take a moment today to reach out to someone you care about and ask them, how are you really doing?
That's a great challenge.
You might be surprised by the power of that simple question.
And who knows, maybe in the process of connecting more mindfully with others, we'll also learn to communicate a little more kindly and compassionately with ourselves.
Absolutely.